This wife life, it's not easy. It takes work and it will be filled with many ups and downs. And while we will not do this thing perfectly, there are some mistakes so many wives make that you need to make sure that you're not making. But before I get into all that, let me welcome you back to my channel. My name is Ayana and this is Beyond Committed, where we talk about everything from life, faith, family, marriage, motherhood, and everything in between, and we take them beyond. If this is your first time here, welcome, and I'm so glad you stopped by. And to make sure you're not a stranger, make sure you press that subscribe button below and turn on notifications so you don't miss a video. All right, now let's dive right in. One of my biggest blessings and then one of my biggest challenges is being married. As much as I love being a wife, this two becoming one business is a lot easier said than done. You have two different people with different perspectives, different experiences, different wants, different needs, and you're trying to come and become aligned and moving forward towards a common goal. It is not easy at all. It takes work, it takes intentionality, and along the way, things are gonna go awry. You're gonna make some missteps. You're gonna do some things you shouldn't have did. You're gonna not do some things you should have done. And the list can go on and on. As you grow and learn together, you and your husband kind of going and growing and building your marriage in that unique way that God created both you and your marriage, it's not going to be easy. It's not always going to be a straight line, and you're going to make some missteps along the way. But it's important that as wives, we're mindful of those and making sure that we are not making the 5 mistakes that most wives make, because you don't have to. And the first mistake most wives make is having unrealistic expectations. Really, whether it's of yourself, of your husband, of your marriage. We create this fantasy, this ideal, life in which we have in our minds. And then when we are walking out the reality of our lives, it does not always pan out that way. Whether it's, how are you going to be a wife? How are you going to show up? The things you're going to do every day, the way you're going to love your husband, the way you're going to do all these things and do them well. And then sometimes things go awry, and then your expectations and the reality don't line up. And then you're stuck in the expectation and not in the reality. And I know for me, this has happened many times because growing up, you have this ideal of, what wife life should be or what marriage should be, and, raising a family and living this American dream, so to speak. And then when you're actually living it out, it's like, ooh, this is not as simple as I thought. This is not as picture perfect as I hoped. And this is definitely not made for TV situations. And we're not talking about reality TV. We're talking about, those scripted sitcom like TVs, those ideas that you have in your mind of what your family is supposed to look like. You come together, everybody sits down for dinner every night, and, you kiss your husband goodbye in the morning, you make his coffee, you do all these things. And then you're like, hey, that may be your intention, but what happens when, you have to get up at different times, or he's gone before you even get up, or you're getting up before he even gets up, or, it's dinner time and he's not home, or you're still rushing trying to get things on the table, and, your schedules kind of get out of line. And it's so important that as wives, we are mindful of having those unreal expectations can really set us up for failure, not because we are failing, but because that's what we see or that's how we feel. So it's so important that as a wife, you are mindful of, yes, there's great to have expectations, but make sure they're realistic so you don't fall into that trap. And the second mistake a lot of wives make is getting their priorities out of order. I know, because I've done this many a times, and this is a course and this is a lesson I have to revisit from time to time, because as wives, we should have our priorities. And yes, things come in, unexpected things happen and things may shift, but that should be more the exception, not the rule. So for instance, for me, my priorities are God first, my husband, my kids, and then everything else. And they kind of get aligned as it sees fit. Now, there are going to be times where, your kids may need you, or there are times where your family may need you, more than, your husband may need you at that point. And that is okay. Your husband should give you grace, and you should give your husband grace if the same thing happens, and vice versa. But this should be the exception, not the rule, realizing that centering yourself on God first allows you to keep everything else in priorities, allows you to love your husband well, allows you to love your kids if you have them well, allows you to do all the things that you're doing in the world well, and then allows you just to kind of have that that center, that peace, and that grace that you need to move throughout your day. And then while putting your husband first, that doesn't mean that, your kids aren't important, your work isn't important, your family isn't important, ministry, all the different things, all the many hats that you wear. That doesn't mean they're not important. That just means that you have your priorities in order, and that you're going to your husband and y'all are talking about the things that you do have going on in the day, the needs of your family, the needs that you have at work, all those things, so he can come alongside you. Y'all are committed to doing this. Remember, two becoming one thing together, and making sure that you are doing what you need to do for yourself, but also you're making sure you're doing what you need to do for your husband and everyone else. Because the truth of the matter is, yes, a lot of people say, happy wife, happy life. But I truly believe that you need both people in that marriage to be happy, so you can be happy doing all the other things that you're supposed to do. And the third mistake a lot of wives make is not practicing self-care. Now, I know I just said, okay, have your priorities in order. Make sure there's God, then your husband, then your kids, and everything else. Yes, but that doesn't mean you neglect yourself in the process. Making sure that you are showing up well in your time with God means you have to make sure you're practicing self-care. Making sure you're showing up well with your husband means you make sure you practice self-care as a wife. Making sure you're showing up well for your kids means you're making sure you're taking care of yourself well as a mom. All those things, although it may not be, listed as putting you first, by pouring into yourself, you're able to pour out well into the other priorities in your life, realizing that you can't give what you don't have. So if you're not taking care of yourself physically, whether that's eating well, whether that's exercise and getting enough sleep, then you're not having the physical strength and stamina that you need to do all the busyness that you do in the day. And then if you're not taking care of yourself spiritually, that means you're not even making time for God. So how are you keeping God first if you're not setting that time that you need to make sure you are where you need to be so you can spend time with him? And then emotionally as well. Whether it is having a coach, whether it is having a therapist, or whether it's just making sure you schedule that girl time with the girlfriends, just to kind of, chill and just be, no matter what it is. It's so important that you are intentional about making sure you're taking care of you, because if you don't take care of you well, you can't take care of anybody else either. And the fourth mistake a lot of wives make is comparing. Either comparing you as a woman, you as a wife, your husband to somebody else, your marriage to somebody else's, your kids to somebody else's, your business to somebody else. The list can go on and on. And it's so important that we are mindful of that, because you can get caught up in comparison and not even realize you're there. And then you're feeling down about yourself, about you as a wife, about your husband, about your marriage. And it's not even about that something is negative or wrong. It's just because you are now comparing yourself or your marriage to somebody else's, and you are finding yourself lacking. And that's something that we have to be so intentional about not doing, because God made us all very uniquely. God made us differently on purpose. So your marriage is not going to look like my marriage or anybody else's, and that's okay. Can we be inspired by, motivated by, and take different things, from other people, different pieces of advice, tips and tools, those wifey tools I like to call them. Can you take those and use them in your marriage? Yes. Will you use them the exact way somebody else does? No. And that's the beauty of it. That's the beauty of marriage. That's the beauty of how God created us. Because although we are very different, there's things we can learn from each other. There's things we can grow together and be motivated and inspired by. But that doesn't mean that we look at somebody else and find ourselves less than or find them greater than. It's just different. So it's so important that as wives, we are very intentional about not comparison. Because in the end of it, you often come out with the shorter end of the stick, and we don't want that, because your marriage and you are beautiful as it is. And the fifth mistake a lot of wives make is focusing too much on the negative. Yes, there will be missteps, mistakes, past hurts, unmet expectations. The list can go on and on, because we're human. Yet, although all these things can happen, that doesn't mean everything is all bad. Yes, we should be intentional about working on our problems and fixing things and growing to be better. Yes, but that doesn't mean everything that's going on, everything that has happened is bad, and everything that is negative. So it's so important that as wives, we have the right perspective. We find the joy and the beauty that is in our marriage, that is in our everyday, while we work on the things we need to work on, because we're always growing, we're always changing, and so are our husbands, and so is our marriage. So as we, do the things we need to do, we are intentional about working on the things we should, and trying to overcome either past hurts, unmet expectations, and all those things, realizing that we can't stay focused on those things, because when we focus on what is the negative, we miss the beauty that is really there. All right, that's it for today. And I want to know, what's another mistake you think that wives often make? Let me know in the comment box below. And if you like this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up, and then make sure you press that subscribe button and turn on your notifications so you don't miss a video. All right, now until I see you again, bye.